Good morning and welcome to this session at the Greenwich Economic Forum on inclusion as a global investment imperative. A firm that invests in economic inclusion and the transition to a global low-carbon economy. I'm also the author of Powering Prosperity, a book which outlines an investment-led roadmap for achieving social equity, global sustainability, and community rejuvenation. In this session, we're going to focus on what I believe is one of the biggest questions of our time, and that is how to close the racial wealth gap in societies across the world. In the US, the Black population in particular has long suffered from injustices that have locked it out of investment in its communities. But this is a global problem. For example, the same story is playing out in Afro-Caribbean, South Asian, and Middle Eastern communities in Europe. Any attempt to heal these divisions in society must begin with humanity and a spirit of inclusion. Of course, we need to invest in infrastructure, health, and education of minority communities, as well as investing in talented minority entrepreneurs and fund managers. But we need to go further. We need to drive change in awareness and attitudes. And to achieve this goal, we'll require a coalition of different forms of capital. Social capital from the world of philanthropy and social investing, financial capital from the private sector, and influential capital from the world of arts, entertainment, and sports, which has the power to embed change into our cultural consciousness. On our panel today, we're privileged to have champions of change representing all three forms of capital here. To talk about the role of social capital, we have Dr. Marcus Hunter and Janae Queen Nazari. Dr. Hunter is professor of sociology and the chair at the Department of African American Studies at UCLA. He's also a celebrated author, and his commentary on Black urban life and inequality has been featured in the Washington Post and New York Times. Janae Queen Nazari is the Chief Strategy Officer of Living Cities, an NGO that harnesses the collective power of multi-billion-dollar foundations, as well as numerous financial institutions and local governments, all in the pursuit of closing the racial income and wealth gap in American cities. Representing financial capital, we hope to have Melissa Bradley, a professor at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, where she teaches impact investing and social entrepreneurship. Melissa is the co-founder of the venture-backed platform Eureka, whose mission is to democratize economic opportunity by empowering entrepreneurs with the know-how to grow small to medium-sized businesses. And from the world of influential capital, we have Willie Prophet Stiggers, an activist and music executive. Prophet is the CEO of the 50/50 Music Group Management and the co-founder and co-chair of the Black Music Action Coalition, an advocacy organization pledged to advance racial justice in the music industry, as well as in society at large. Before we dive into the discussion, just a reminder that I'll be taking questions, so you can use the Q&A function to post your question, and I'll try to share them with the panelists in due course. So, without further ado, let's dive in. And Marcus, maybe we can start with you. It seems to me that if we're going to get anywhere in terms of closing the racial wealth gap, we need to start by investing in the truth. Can you tell us how we can build a greater national awareness about the injustices that led to the racial wealth gap in the first place? And how can we use the truth as a foundation on which to educate, legislate, and invest?
Thank you for that question, Indranil. And top of the morning out here in California. On the idea of the truth, the important part is to remember that the truth must be documented and that the truth is our way to heal. So you want to document to heal and also document and heal, because the healing process itself should be documented. Now the question becomes where, how, and why do you document it? I think the first thing is to emphasize national effort at the government level that I've been working on with Congresswoman Barbara Lee to create a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission. This is going alongside local efforts such as in Asheville, North Carolina, where reparations and truth and reconciliation that we see at Philadelphia and many other places. The idea really is to create what I think not only as truth commissions where people have testimonies and archives and things like that, but to also archive that truth in order to promote a racial and cultural healing. And so in that legislative effort, I refer to that as an arch. Arch of Truth, an archive for racial cultural healing that will be located nationally, but also to think about how we can get those going at the local level. Most importantly, when we think of things like social capital, it's about how to help people get by and also how to help people get ahead. So getting by then is also about reimagining what we think about as investing in Black people. So I've been working with the Breathe Me Revolution on creating a Black America refund because truthfully speaking, on the matter of truth, when we look at Black history or American history more generally, what we see is the failed experience of being a Black American. Therefore, my argument often is not that we simply need to defund institutions, but instead acknowledge the truth that Black America is owed a refund. And if you reimagine the refund as an investment strategy, then what we're talking about, for example, is debt relief. One way to help people get ahead is to actually just wipe out their debt. For the experience of most Black people, you're always already in debt before you get started. I often refer to that as the mobility blues. I remember getting into college and being so excited that I got into Columbia University. And the first thing I got in the mail was, oh, can we get a $500 deposit on your room? And I thought to myself, okay, so I am formerly homeless. Where is this $500 coming from? That is the beginning of the kind of pyramid scheme of mobility as a Black person. So you're paying into a system where you're being overly surveilled and underfunded, underserved. And I think when we start to think about Black America as being owed a refund, and also as thinking about debt relief for Black people as a new way to invest in Black futures, then we're moving closer to making sure that social capital is not only accessible, but that is being distributed according to historical facts and also a truth that is set around healing us all culturally and racially.
Thank you for that, Marcus. Now, let's say we build this foundation of truth. We'll still need to overcome a series of structural barriers to inclusion, like the segregation of Black communities and cutting them off from quality housing, education, healthcare, and jobs, and the generational wealth gap that prices Black people, as you just pointed out, Marcus, out of higher education in many cases. Just turning to you, Janae, can you talk about how you see social capital and potentially financial capital playing a key role in addressing some of these issues?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I just build upon what Marcus said. Financially, we need to see it as an investment, period. And I think that one of the things that social capital can do is sort of close some of the gaps in terms of how we understand where those investments need to be driven and to whom and how. And so once you build on the foundation of truth, you give people an opportunity to practice. And we must remember that people make up the systems and do the work to keep them functioning as they do. And so if we're looking at our system and we're looking at our nation and we say we want truth, healing, reconciliation, well-being, wealth, health, then we need to sort of connect social capital, financial capital, influential capital with the truth and the reckoning from our past. And so like some of it is just, we got to own it. I often tell folks that there's no such thing as a broken system. We sort of go about it in terms of changing policies and practices. Those things are necessary, but it's both and. What about the people? What about the work that we have to do as people? And I think in the philanthropy space, that is a message that we can carry. That is work that we can do. Those are investments that we can make. In philanthropy, we can test out some of these hypotheses or some of these big bets and design proof points so that they can be taken up in the marketplace, while the marketplace is also shifting and pivoting to invest in people, to invest in a healed and a reconciled country. So, those are some of the things that are necessary. It's not enough to just talk about, closing racial income and wealth gaps without being willing to do the work, to spend the money, to be in relationship, to take the risk, to leverage resources. So it's people, it's processes, it's systems, all working together with some truth, grounded in truth.
Janae, can you talk about some of the initiatives that you've been working on at Living Cities and where you've seen some of the impact, where that could come from? What are the kind of things that we could be pushing forward, whether it's through philanthropy or commercial initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we're doing at Living Cities is what we call a year of reckoning. And we have a cohort of 6 cities, and they're literally going through a curriculum of it called Undoing Racism. So if they understand the history of racism and how government had played a role in creating the barriers that exist, then they, in their role, because they have power, they have positions, can undo those things. And so we have seen we've seen some examples where government and local leaders supported basic income pilots. So in, I think it's Mississippi, Melissa, you'll know that, where they were giving mothers $1,000 a month to be supported. That they were better off. That was good. You know, people say just give the people money, and everybody freaks out. No, 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 no. There's a pilot there. There's a pilot happening in Stockton and in other places where just basic needs are being met. We're also seeing in cities how government and businesses are rerouting their procurement dollars and their procurement spend. Procurement dollars are great ways for businesses to start and scale their businesses. But when you look at sort of what the requirements are to get started, it can be cumbersome and keep certain groups out. You've got prime contractors, and they have all the relationships, all the networks, all the resources, all the lawyers, all the, just like go down the list to get started, to get the $2 billion from the city of New Orleans, who had a lot of rebuilding to do post Katrina. The folks who were getting those resources were people who didn't even live in the city of New Orleans. And then you saw an indicator where you had 51% of Black men who were able to work were out of work. And so local folks got together and they shut that down. And they started to work to make sure that those folks got started businesses, got jobs. They streamlined their services and resources and approaches so that more local folks could actually benefit from the rebuild of Katrina, and no longer would the indicators across education, health, entrepreneurship look the same pre-Katrina anymore. So those are just a few examples of what's happening in places. And that's on. I'm sorry, I'm taking up. Let me add one more piece. That's on the government side and in cities and with communities, and that's sort of the interplay of government, business, and community leaders. But let me make a quick note about the private equity and venture capital side. One of the other things we are doing, my colleague and I, Demetra Duckett, and then Melissa Bradley, who's here, we have co-founded this group called Builders and Benefactors, and it's a group of mostly Black, but BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, private equity and venture capitalists who don't get a full and fair chance to participate. And so using philanthropy, we're working to close the gap in terms of the resources, networks, and other things that are necessary so they can participate. Same ideas, same risk, risk return profile, sometimes better than others, but are constantly left out. And so we're just being really intentional and unapologetic about focusing on these groups so that we can go ahead and close this 228-year wealth gap. Because if we wait, I'm sure, it's just going to get worse. So thanks, Indranil.
Melissa, if we can turn to you now, you have a great deal of experience in sustainable investing. Can you tell us about some of the investment opportunities or investment strategies you see, whereby private capital, financial capital can generate attractive returns while still having a significant impact on this issue of closing the racial wealth gap?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be amongst such greatness on this panel. So thank you for having me. I think there's a couple of things. One, despite the statistics that talk about our communities, which oftentimes are not fully reflective of what is there in terms of wealth and economic prosperity, we find that in our portfolios, African American business owners, particularly women, outperform their white male peers consistently. It is oftentimes not at the same dollar amount because they're not getting the same type of investment, but we are seeing tremendous growth within the various sectors that we serve. So from a trend perspective, I think anything in the B2C space is going through the roof, and in part because there has been a plethora of new funds that have come online who are willing to come down capitalization in terms of seed funding. So a lot of entrepreneurs who normally would not have been able to get to market as quickly, you have folks like Next Gen Venture Partners, you have City Ventures, you have others who have now stepped up and said, we're going to fill that seed gap. I would also say you have a lot of angel investors who've now come into the fray saying, I want to better understand what does it mean to invest in entrepreneurs of color, and more importantly, what does it mean to invest in non-tech businesses? I think it's important to note that just under 20% 90% of all Black businesses are tech companies. So as all these new funds come to the market, we have to understand there's still a gap that has to be met in terms of the plethora of tech companies, but there is a ton of entrepreneurs in health, beauty, hair care, wellness, et cetera, that luckily a lot of these distribution outlets like Target and others are saying, hey, we need to have more products on the shelf. So from a impact perspective, I think any B2C business and this investing in minority business enterprises going through the roof with a wider capital stack available to them, new capital stacks available to them in terms of equity and revenue-based financing and royalties, so lots of options, and an opportunity for B2C markets to get into these outlets that typically have been put aside. I think there's also a rise in two areas that we as people of color are traditionally impacted by, which is financial services and health. So there's been a dramatic increase I've seen over the past couple of months of Black entrepreneurs, particularly, again, Black women, leading health or health tech companies, recognizing this huge void. Once again, the amplified inefficiencies in the healthcare market has created a market opportunity for our entrepreneurs to show up. And then obviously in financial inclusion in particular, as there has been this plethora of fintech companies, again, not a lot of money trickling to our communities. So you're beginning to see a lot more financial inclusion platforms, from what we saw Sean Puffy Combs do a while ago to try to bridge that gap of PPP. But again, this pandemic and the challenges with stimulus has surfaced yet another market opportunity for financial services to be a place that Black entrepreneurs who have been inventing now can find that capital to be able to grow.
Thank you, Melissa. Can you talk about some of the newer industries, such as the green revolution, in terms of renewable energy and other industrial sectors, which also need to take root in the U.S. and where the U.S. can take a leadership role? Where do you see Black entrepreneurs playing a role in these sectors, and what can we do through sustainable investing to support those sectors?
So I think, let me take a step back on the sector piece. So I used to actually be a fellow at CAP and Center for American Progress. And one of the issues that we did under the Obama administration was trying to get more financing into sustainable. I think first we have to recognize there is a fundamental friction problem, and that many of the regulated bodies are unable to have the freedom to make investments in the nuances of clean energy. For example, under prior registration that still consists, unfortunately, that it was easier for American investors to invest in Asian or European green infrastructure than it was in the United States, in part because of regulation around what counted as CRA, in part of how do you book it as a bank, and then I think also just having products available, it was greater outside. So there were some fundamental systemic challenges that I hope get addressed ultimately in terms of how regulators look at the investment of banks, how they're coded, how they're not penalized, what are the asset requirements, et cetera. So I do think it will increase, but it's going to take some time. So there's a policy lever. I think from a supply or demand lever, if you consider the entrepreneurs in demand, I have to say there's not a lot. There's not a lot of Black entrepreneurs that have come into this space, in part because it is a very much capital intensive business. I think we're beginning to see more and more. Having worked at Green for All many years ago, we saw a lot of folks trying to come up in this space in Oakland and the surrounding areas. But again, these things are not inexpensive. It is a huge hurdle, which is unfortunate because I think the E in ESG is just going to continue to grow. I think, again, this pandemic has just shown the inefficiencies that exist in the market. If we look ahead and we actually get to a new administration, I think there are certainly lots more tax credits and incentives that will enable green investment. That my hope is the green investment coupled with, if Biden is finally installed, the whole Biden plan for Black America, there is a caveat in there that talks about investing in green entrepreneurs that happen to be Black and brown because they best know their communities. And I certainly hope that translates to the Native American communities for sure, as many of their lands have been robbed as other infrastructure plays have come in. So I'm optimistic, but I want to be mindful that would probably come mostly from an investment banker perspective. Banks need some regulatory change to reduce the friction for them to make those kind of investments right now.
Let's turn to you, Prophet. You work a lot with influencers, and it's always amazing to me how, notwithstanding the many barriers that they face, many of our cultural icons in entertainment, music, and sport, are Black or people of color. and they somehow break through and really control in many ways the cultural dialogue. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of these influencers are doing to advance the cause of closing the racial wealth gap, and what can we do to support them?
Yes, thanks, Indranil, for having me. Thank everyone that's on this panel. It's always awesome to see brilliant Black minds, especially the females, have an opportunity to speak and have the floor, and then to do it with such authority and conviction. I just want to applaud you guys. And Dr. Marcus is a colleague of ours and worked with us very closely. Always happy for his genius to be a part of the conversation. But I run in part an organization co-founded with 7 other brilliant minds in the music business after the George Floyd murder. The music industry wanted to respond to this somehow. So we created an organization of over 200 of the top artists, managers, lawyers, white, Black, across the aisle, people from Billie Eilish to Snoop Dogg to Roddy Ricch, who all came together with this understanding that if you're really serious about the statement of Black Lives Matter, that you have to truly invest in Black people. You have to allow Black artists to survive. You have to allow the Black executives to thrive. When you're dealing with an industry where the first African American recording artist was an ex-slave in 1865, it helped you understand the relationship between Black people in the music business from day one. So now we at this point, this sort of been in America that I don't know if we ever been before, when the artists are now asking, what can we do and how can we utilize our platforms and our voices in ways that go beyond just posting or standing next to a product, but actually impacting and creating systemic change in a very real way. With why we partnered with Breathe With Me Revolution, a great activist friend of mine, Lee Blake, who is the co-founder of Breathe Me Revolution and a longtime activist, one of the first people to bring the artist community into the AIDS pandemic conversation and helping to create campaigns to address that and on a global scale. One of the most powerful pieces to come out of that was an organization called Keep a Child Alive that she created with Alicia Keys that provided antiretroviral therapy for children in Africa. Millions of children lives saved, and they built clinics throughout the continent. Again, using celebrity fame currency, cultural currency, and using that to impact society. Bring us up to date. Alicia called Lee about a month or so ago when she got the invitation to perform at the NFL kickoff and wanted to figure out a way in which she can utilize that opportunity to leverage the NFL in such a way that it can impact the Black community, not just in a statement way, but in a bridge the wealth gap way. So Lee and Ann Haggard and Dr. Paul Zeitz and Dr. Marcus came up with the framework around this Black America refund that she then approached the NFL with and was able to get a $1 billion commitment from them to participate in this fund that's going to go towards direct impact. But then beyond that, that sparked the conversation for other celebrities. So we're working with a host of artists now that are going to be using their fame and cultural currency to leverage businesses, corporations, and the government to actually not just invest in this fund, but actually understand that this is how we end racism, allowing people to have access, right? Black people don't need charity. People of color don't need handouts. We need the proper access. We need the playing field to be leveled. And so between the Breathe With Me Revolution and the Black America Refund, that's our mission, and it looks like it's what we have happening here.
Thank you, Prophet. And I just want to remind everyone listening that if you want to ask a question, please post it on the Q&A function and we can get to those questions in this session. What you're saying, Prophet, reminded me that music industry is a great example of how much intellectual property is created by artists, entertainers, scientists. So what can we do to help, Black community and the people of color to make the most out of this intellectual property, to get the most financial value out of it, as well as to disseminate it for the betterment of the entire community and the ecosystem?
Well, for one, the essence of all music is Black music, right? And whether we're talking about pop, country, rock, jazz, blues, the essence of all music derived from the spirit of Africa. So that is the first thing we do, is come to that understanding, because in doing so, it allows you then to respect the creators of that in a certain way. And that's part of what's been happening, that there hasn't been respect for the creators. So you have Black artists that have contributed to the cultural experience of this world, and they have not reaped the benefits from it. Their children do not reap the benefits from it. Their grandchildren do not reap the benefits from it. And part of that is because we don't have access to the capital. So then you go and auction off your IP, you auction off your talent, you auction off your cultural capital to the highest bidder. Not even the highest bidder. Sometimes it's whoever's in the room, because the idea is you have to feed yourself, you have to feed your family. And so part of what we can do is understand and respect the creators of the culture, and then allow the access to the capital so they can invest in their own ideas, their own inventions, their own talent, their own music, without having to go to other places to do so, where they're going to be robbed, their culture is going to be exploited, and they're going to walk away with nothing, which has been the experience of Black artists in this country. So we need to allow the Black creators to be respected, and then have access to the capital.
Can I just
Marcus, I know that you've done a lot of work in this area as well, in terms of whether it's music, or whether it's an entrepreneurial idea or scientific principle. How Black community and the minorities can hold on to that intellectual property and get the maximum value from it. Tell us about some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to, one, shout out to Aretha Franklin, respect, as Brother Prophet is saying. It is important. I think the other thing about this is I'm completing a book called Radical Reparations, where, to kind of cut to the chase, the idea of what I try to do is open up and expand our horizon of what reparations means. And it'll come back around to what Prophet was just mentioning about the music industry. But I imagine America as a mansion with many rooms, many floors, many houses. But if any person were to come in, whether they be a citizen or immigrant, what they would find is loads of laundry, piles of laundry everywhere. Dirty laundry, very dirty laundry. Okay, flies and bad smells and everything. And those piles are political reparations, intellectual reparations, legal reparations, economic reparations, spatial reparations, social reparations, and spiritual reparations. And why do I say that? I say that in part because we have to get out of a cultural mindset that has fed us a diet that reparations means money-based, economic, pecuniary things only, and not things like what Prophet was just talking about, which is intellectual property. And to paraphrase a lesson from the great life of Prince, we are all slaves until we own our masters. And so I would take it out of just the music industry and over into the academy. It is quite common as a professor to sell off your entire idea for $0.00. We as professors make $0.00 off of our intellectual property. So when you scale up to the music industry, what you wind up seeing is the same kind of exploitation, just at a heightened polarity. So part of what we need to really think about is how can we create a landscape? Again, this is about the mobility blues. If I am a young Black artist, whether I be a scholar or a painter or a musician, I come into the game knowing that I'm going to have to sell myself and exploit myself away before I ever see the light of day of profit. That is happening at every scale of mobility. So ultimately, how we have to get out of this is to create an investment strategy that reimagines mobility not as the Ponzi pyramid scheme that it is for Black people, but instead as one where if you have a great idea, if you have a great book, if you have a great album, you get to begin from a place of positive net gain because you're bringing something to the table heretofore unseen. So I think a big part of this is to really understand intellectual reparations as recognition. If we had truth commissions happening across the United States, the music industry would be able to walk in and say a couple of things that I think are really important. One, you heard of jazz before? Okay, black people invented that. Let's start with that as the premise. You heard of rock and roll? Well, guess what? Little Richard, the ancestor who passed on this year, he invented that. What kind of foundation can you set up for a new profit experience when you start from a premise of truth about the situation? That when you acknowledge people, that acknowledgement sets up their generations to have the wealth that they lost. So that we're not constantly doing this over and over and over again, continuous experience of recovering facts, of recovering inventors, recovering creations, and then assigning authority to the actual right people. But instead to just start from a premise that black people have made critical contributions. And the reason why they don't have the wealth that would match up or align to those contributions is not because of any personal or pathological failing. It is about a system that has set them up to always enter into a new experience with a premise of debt. And this is why I emphasize the mobility blues, the pyramid scheme of mobility for black people, and really setting the deck so that you don't have to sell away part of your soul before you ever get to see a profit. I mean, that's the new way to be thinking about things. And I would encourage folks who are listening into us to really also think to yourself, what kind of diet have I been fed that made me think that investment is always when I meet somebody who has a great idea and starting from that point? And not thinking about the pathway to that conversation and where can we unencumber black people along those ways so that by the time they get to, let's say, Shark Tank, there's a more equal playing field where they're not just ready to give up something on an 80-20 profit margin against themselves just because this is their shot. To make the window not only crack open, but just be wide open, I think is where we need to go.
And if I can just add to that, because this is the investment crowd that we're speaking to, the finance crowd that we're speaking to, the wealth that Dr. Market just spoke to is the proof of concept. We're not talking about investing in black people as if we don't know it will be profitable. We know it's profitable. The issue is that the wealth has been stolen, right? That we haven't received it. It's not like you don't know whether or not the genius that exists in black people is real. You know it. You preyed on it and you have exploited it. So the question is, we have to now get to a point where if we're serious about this country bending, because the music industry, the recording, the fashion industry, corporate America are reflections of this society, period. So when we fix the society, then we see changes happen in those other sectors. And if we are serious about this conversation, it starts there. It starts understanding that black people, you already know the wealth is there. You have exploited it for years. So now it's about allowing us, not even allowing us, but if you're serious about the conversation, folks have to be at the table, allowed access, and playing fields have to be level.
I just want to build on that if I can.
Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I just want to share some data because I think Prophet nailed it, right? I think we have to be mindful that we're not just talking about the wealth that we've created in light of all the racism and oppression and let's say faulty systems, but the opportunity cost, right? Citibank wrote a report that said there's $16 trillion cost to everyone because of racism. We know because there has been a lack of parity in investment between Black and white businesses that the Black community has lost almost 1 million jobs, but the economy has lost $150 billion in economic uplift that would have been generated by those businesses. So I think it's important that we understand this is both recognizing the opportunity costs that have been created by not investing in Black and brown entrepreneurs, and then to know that as a market, it is us, right? There has been a 40% decline in white males starting businesses. There has been over 70% increase of African-American women, and about 80% if you begin to include Latinx. So when you say, wow, look at all the money that we've lost by investing in other things and underinvesting in Black and brown folks, and then look at what the hurdles that African Americans in particular have accomplished in light of what my esteemed panel have just talked about. We have faster growth rates. We employ people more. We are at a paramount number of people unemployed because of COVID. The companies that I work with, they have all hired at least 2 employees since COVID started. And so it's important that this is not just investing in Black people because we're popular and because you now recognize that we have been overlooked, but we have also always always, always overperformed. And so as Black people, and I know Janae wants to weigh in, as an asset class, we are probably one of the most risk tolerant groups of people that anyone can that has a multiplier effect because our DNA drives us as a community oriented business, not just a capitalistic one. And we are committed to creating jobs and empowering the health clinic down the street and helping the kids in the neighborhood, which is not what you see, with all due respect, in most white boys with hoodies coming out of Silicon Valley. There is no orientation towards community. So the loss of the multiplier effect for the entire economy, because Black people think beyond ourselves naturally, I think that is a huge opportunity cost.
And let me tell you something. And so I'll say that in a sentence. And the market has never been particularly good at valuing the risk return profile of Black folks. And guess who's losing? You are, because we know how to survive. So I just want to sort of double down on that and add a couple more things. Profit. It comes down with psychology for me. Like we need a paradigm shift. We need to change our minds and we need to change our behaviors about who Black people are. Anti-Blackness is at the root of all of this. It's based on human bondage and dehumanizing Black bodies to build an economy. That is what it's about. So if you can actually begin to believe in us and to work through the psychology of all the messages we get about who Black people are and who we are not, and we begin to embrace us as fully human, that actually will help us to behave into these investment strategies, behave into doing what is better to sort of increase our GDP. We're all losing out, but it's actually beliefs and behaviors, and we all have power to make a call. And some of y'all got resources, you got power, you got network. You can make a call, and you are operating in multiple spheres of influence. In those spheres of influence, what are you doing? What calls are you making? What are you disrupting? And so if anti-Blackness is the fulcrum that makes racism work and it actually makes us all suffer, we got to get rid of that. And that's some of what we're saying. That's what's behind it. And Prophet, I want to just add to some of what you said when you say we need access. I say yes, and we need security, because there's a lot of folks who run around here saying we have access. We got a little programs, we got a little bit this, we carve out a little percentage of that. I work in philanthropy. Most folks use 5% of their endowment to invest, and it's impact investing. But the other 95% is being invested in the market. So let's stop separating that. Stop separating that. But you have access. That's not good enough. It's a start. It's a catalyst. But we need security. And then I think the other thing that I'll stop with is that we also have to shift. We have to shift our minds from the scarcity mindset to an abundance. Y'all, America has proven its abundance over and over again. The world is abundant. If we can actually just shift our mind to abundance and recognize that there's enough for us all, we can get rid of the dark magic of European imperialism that scarcity is the way we have to live. We don't have to. There's enough for us all. And if anyone has ever, and if you haven't seen how it works, look at Black people, look at Latinx folks, look at Indigenous folks still surviving in their culture and finding ways to be resilient and still contribute to our economies. And so, abundance.
I think it's a very key point that you're talking about, all of you here, which is basically the untapped potential that's there for the taking. And the fact that to unlock that potential, you have to nourish the pathway all the way up to the point where the company is ready to be invested in. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of inclusion to be made in that journey to something that's investable in the conventional sense of the word. Can we talk in the last few minutes about some of the initiatives you see out there for, nourishing that pathway? What can we do to, help with the housing, the infrastructure, the education, and all of those levers that help unlock this amazing creative potential that, can add to the productivity of the country?
Yeah, I would start with just thinking at the kind of government level. Federally speaking, I started off by talking about working with Congresswoman Barbara Lee on a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission. And also in that commission, as we are trying to propose it as legislation, is to create a racial equity and transformation fund, where you're able to then help augment local efforts toward truth and reconciliation and repair and transformation. And I think what's important here is to remember that while truth doesn't sound sound like, the most sexy thing. It actually is the foundation of any kind of financial liberation that we're trying to see. That if you actually have a documented location that says we are making these moves based on historical based evidence, it is not just opinion. Black people are not just paranoid. They are not just stressed out for no reason. There is a documented record that demonstrates that they have suffered at an imbalance into a detriment of themselves. And so for me, it's about moving from that paradigm of surviving to thriving. How do we get over to that side? And how we get over to that side is in a cultural mindset shift. And I think that's what the truth can do, is that once you have that truth out there, it starts to feed a new mindset. And the more you feed it, the better it is. And I, in my classes that I teach at UCLA, telling my students the following: in a world where it costs something for everything, it is still absolutely free to change your mind. So one must ask themselves, why is my mind set about the condition of Black people, or about the condition of racism, or about the condition of anti-Blackness, or the condition of colonization? Why is that still the foundation for our economy? Why do we also think that if we give Black people money, it has to be cash in hand? This is why I emphasize debt relief, or some kind of debt relief on education or on home ownership, because we also know your home is your largest asset. Black home ownership has not been at all in any kind of equity with their white counterparts for over a century. So part of the question becomes, how do we start to create that parity? How do we get more Black homeowners? And for me, the answer is the program that we have in the government for student debt relief is only approving 1% of the applicants. And this is after you work a job for 10 years in the public sector. I myself, while qualifying, may not get that relief. But imagine $170,000, or by the government's estimate, $1 trillion of student loan debt. How many more of those things can be $1 trillion of home ownership if we get people out of that debt cycle? So it's also about a cultural mindset shift, and also one in which we see pathways forward that are to the benefit of everyone, because ultimately we all know Black people spend their money. They put their money back into the economy. They recycle those investments. That's how it works. And so I think getting into that kind of framework is the way of the future. That is the way to get to a place where we're seeing more equity, more parity, and more inclusion.
So when time ticks down, I just want to add on that if I can. I want to, I guess the one takeaway that I would want for this audience is, with all due respect, we don't need any more programs. We got enough programs for Black people. What we need, because programs are isolated, one-offs, marginalized, and they're not systemic. What we need is folks to reimagine the current distribution channels. They need to look at who are the current inputs that are driving their investment, and where is the diversity in their asset managers? Where is the diversity in their LPs and their GPs? Where is the diversity of sectors and understanding and partnerships? We all represent a group of people that anyone can reach out to and say, hey, I'm trying to find this person. I am fielding at least 10 calls a day on folks saying, I need to find some Black entrepreneurs. Great, call me, but let's not reinvent the system. So I think reimagine the who is in your sphere to help you expand the aperture of your investments, and reimagine distribution channels that are already up and running for Black people. If you think about Tulsa, we have recreated Tulsa. We've got our own banks. We've got our own underground railroads. We've got our own communications. So don't create a program. You need to invest in the infrastructure that we all collectively have put together, knowingly and unknowingly, that is here to really support our communities. But I would say we don't need another diversity program. We don't need another one-off. But if somebody creates another fund, I'm going to scream and say, do you already know how many Black GPs there are? We don't need a bunch of non-Black people trying to invest in Black entrepreneurs when there's a ton of underinvested GPs out here who are ready to make the investments with a huge top of the funnel.
Well, I want to thank all of you on the panel for an extremely powerful discussion. A lot of food for thought, but I think a message that there and constructiveness can really help to unlock all of that. So thank you for your participation, and this concludes the session and the day's agenda for the Greenwich Economic Forum. Thank you.